What a treat this is going to be. Don Cardona joins us. He is a sports media extraordinaire, and we're going to get into his resume, what he's done, the significance of the poster behind him. A guy who does his own podcast where he talks about how sports is made. Well, we're going to find out what makes Don Cardona. This is the podcast to see that through. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. And so this is going to be an opportunity for everybody out there to be entertained, to certainly learn and have some fun with someone who has really been on the pulse of sports media and media in general, filmmaking and media as a whole. And it is going to be a blast. Don, thank you for doing this. And I appreciate you and certainly what you've done in this industry. Don is very busy with what he is working on right now. And I wanted to plug your website in cardonacreative.com. We'll get into that. Also, you used to be a producer for ESPN, NBC. The list goes on, including Universal. We'll, obviously discuss that and the significance that those roles played in your life. But I wanted to start right here. What is that singular moment in your life, in your career, when an unforeseen, sudden change, a sudden pivot happened, and you were most proud within yourself about how you dealt with that and how you proceeded after that happened?
Boy, there's probably a lot of those, but I guess I'll go back to where I really started taking responsibility roles in the industry. Started off pulling cable, worked my way up to camera, and then one day I was sitting in a restaurant. This is in Phoenix, and a guy named Bob Joyner, who was a cameraman there, had mentioned to me, "The Diamondbacks are starting a Spanish telecast. You should do that." And I didn't really understand what director or producer was in terms of what their responsibilities were other than in the truck. And so I said, I'm not qualified for that. And he said, no, I really think that would be good for you. There's not many people that speak Spanish. And my Spanish at the time was not the greatest, but I did grow up speaking a little bit of it with grandparents and stuff like that. And so he just kept pushing me. And I went and I interviewed and told them what I could provide. And they had already filled the positions. So I was a little bummed out, but I decided to take a risk at a lower rate to work as a cameraman on that production, and maybe I could help grow that production. And shortly after, I'd say, and this was the Diamondbacks inaugural season. So I was at the inaugural game, home game, and working high first camera, and things didn't go as I would have liked them to have went. And so I went to the owner of the company, and basically said, "Here's my case." And it took 3 or 4 games where they finally trusted me, and then I started directing, and then that turned into producing and directing. And so I think the pivotal moment there was, one, listen to other people sometimes because they might know you better than you know yourself. But two, it was learning how to take risks and not being afraid to fail. And that was, one of many of the stories that I have. And then that eventually led to a pretty decent career for me.
The D in your last name, as you were just talking about, stands for determination. And I hear it from what you're talking about when you first got your start and other instances in your career. Where has determination been something that you have latched onto the most, and it has helped you get through some challenging, uncertain times that this business happens to throw us from time to time?
Lots. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, gosh, that's you've hit me with 2 really tough questions to start off with. I was hoping you'd go a little easy on me. I mean, determination is really just, for me, it's been about vision, I think. I mean, if I can give you a quick answer on that, because if you don't have a vision for where you want to go in your career, or even the production that you want to put on, it kind of falls flat. And I've always seemed to have been one of those people that, if somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm going to try and prove them wrong until I can't. And I think that started with my baseball playing days in high school, where I had a coach that just would just hammer you, and I never experienced that. And once I realized that he wasn't trying to come down on me on a personal level, although it sounded personal, It was more, give me all you've got. And there were many times I went home and said, I'm quitting. I'm not going to do this. And then overnight, I guess I'd think about it, and I'm like, I'm just going to prove them wrong. So I think the determination kind of came from not wanting somebody to embarrass me and saying I can't do something, and not, and then having them be right. I wanted to prove them wrong. So
Let's take that one step further. So you get fuel from people telling you something you couldn't do over the course of your career and proving them wrong. Where have you actually proven yourself in doing something that you didn't even know you could do? Where it wasn't that you didn't think you couldn't do it, but that you had like a baseline of where you felt you could reach, or where you could meet, and you surpassed that at some point in your career, where you surprised yourself with something you achieved, or a game you covered, or in a moment in your career where you said, wow, where you impressed yourself in a way.
I think that day's still yet to come. But I would
Oh,
say, but I would say, I mean, I've worked with TVG Network covering horse racing, which I knew nothing about to start, as a director, and then I moved on to ESPN as a producer in ESPN International. So there was a lot of there was a lot of moments in there, um, but I had kind of grown into the television world, so it wasn't as unfamiliar to me, and it wasn't as daunting. So I guess I would say, towards the end of my time with NBC Sports, I was I had become interested in bull riding many years ago, but I had an opportunity to go see what it was all about, and I put together a short 3-minute film as kind of a last minute thing for an international short film competition, the 3-minute max. And I had learned Final Cut Pro, which is an editing program, many years before, and had done some things with that, but I never really applied it. And so I had when I started working on this project, I had to teach myself how to edit everything, all the audio. I bought a little camera, HD camera, that I was trying to figure out as I'm shooting this thing. And again, this thing was supposed to have just been little short clips for YouTube or social media. I never had intended to make anything longer. But then when this competition came up, I'm like, what the heck? I'll give it a try. And I did. And I ended up winning Best Documentary in that thing. And that completely shocked me because I had created features throughout my career with the networks, on various projects, but those were, quick out the door type things. Nothing lasted longer than 2 weeks. And this I really had to teach myself. And so when I got that notification, I think that's the first time I really remember being shocked in my entire career about something that I had done. So that was fun, but it was also like you almost had that imposter complex
Yeah.
where you shouldn't be doing this, but you did, and okay, accept it.
Don Cardona is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. You are at the heart of who you are, a competitive person. You've been playing sports. You grew up playing baseball and other stuff as well. And certainly in an industry where things are very competitive. What is the most competitive aspect of you?
Um, I think it's that I don't, that's kind of a tough question because I think the common answer would be just fear of losing. Um, but I think it's challenging myself, and my puppy's coming up here.
Oh, my dog's
Um,
right behind me, so I love it. Oh, I love it. Yes.
but I think
Such a
I think
cutie.
it's the competitiveness is just see how far I can take things on my own, and I think that's probably my worst. Um, my biggest hang up is because I've always wanted to try and do things on my own. So when I became a supervisor, I was senior coordinating producer at Universal Sports Network. I was doing a lot of things, and finally my boss at the time was like, you need to delegate. And that was, of course, the best advice anybody could give, but I had to learn how to do that because as a producer on your own, you're trying to make the show how you want it to. So I think that's been, trying to make the competition for trying to do everything myself is really a competition against myself, I think. And that's kind of a good thing sometimes, but it can be a bad thing, or it can just limit you in different ways as well. So
How hard are you on yourself? And where can it be limiting? Where can it be uplifting when you look at yourself and you examine your work and you process it and you evaluate what you do and what you have done?
I wouldn't say I'm really hard on myself, because I understand, and this came as being a supervisor. You understand what people's limitations are and where their strengths are, and where I really tried to push my staff was, I know what you're capable of, and that's where I would push. And so when it came to me, it was really hard to reflect on that. But I would say it's kind of a um, one of those things where I'm hard on myself in terms of, gosh, that could be so much better, and I try and get it, and then it turns into frustration when I can't get it that way. And so then I'll either pull back, reassess, and then attack it a different way, or I'll just kind of move on from that and then come back from it later. So, when it comes to being hard on myself, I think it's more of the expectations rather than just going to walk away from this because I'm so frustrated. If that kind of answers your question.
From being hard on yourself to working hard at something, and evidence of that would be the poster behind you and your role in the formation of rodeo and this film that you put together and the festival. Why rodeo? Where did that come from for you, an interest in that? And what do you hope to accomplish with this new venture, this new side project, this expansive library of, you've done sports, rodeo certainly included that, but you're always out there expanding your horizons, if you will.
Well, first of all, I'm a busybody. My mind is constantly going, so I definitely need something to take my mind or preoccupy my mind. The genesis for this, and it's related to the short that I had mentioned just a few minutes ago. The genesis for this, I grew up in Western Colorado in a rodeo type of environment. I never really had any interest in it. There were people in my school that were cowboys and jocks and all that, those different cliques. So I never really had much interest in it. But when I lived in Phoenix and I was the cameraman that I had mentioned, I got contracted to do bull riding for ESPN, and I was the cameraman on the shoot, the handheld cameraman. And when I saw the intensity of these cowboys and the bulls combined in that shoot, it gave me a different appreciation for what being a cowboy is all about. I mean, cowboys throughout history have, in American history anyways, have been nothing but tough guys, and that's the reputation they have, but never really clicked on why. But it's intense. So through the years, I just kind of became a fan. So I'd watch rodeo on TNN or Versus Network, after working Major League Baseball at, you get done at 10, 11 o'clock, and then I'd go home and be wound up. And so I'd surf the channel and I'd find bull riding. And so I became a fan, and I kind of knew who the riders were and some of the bull names. And then when I moved back to Colorado with NBC Sports, I had friended a guy I went to high school with who was a state champion bull rider, and he was still in the business, and so he was putting on a bull riding short just south of Denver, Castle Rock, and I finally had the opportunity to go. And when I was there, my neighbor who I took said that they did something to the bulls to make them buck. And that really shocked me because I had never heard that before. And I wanted to know more. And that was the first thought. So I went down to the arena after I was done and reintroduced myself to this guy from high school. He invited me out to his ranch and kind of showed me, and we talked about, and I said, so my neighbor said that you tie the rope around the bull's private parts. And he said, that's a myth. You can follow me all you want. And so I did. And I followed him for a whole year. And like I said, it was just meant to be social media posts. But I really had a different appreciation for it, the commitment, the care that goes into these animal athletes, and they're animal athletes, and they're good at what they do. And I just thought this would be really interesting to capture from a fly on the wall perspective. Like I had no agenda on anything when I went to shoot it. I just wanted to just shoot it. And what it did, it has opened up a lot for me. Number one, stock contractors, the ones that owns the bulls, and they don't they have a really hard job as it is. I found out that my subject, and you see him there, his name's Ty Ronaldo. He was a professional bull rider and he could have been a world champion, but he had a wreck with a bull, ended his career. He traveled with some of the best bull riders in the business. And then I realized that bull riding is not just about the rider and the bull. It's There's a lot that goes into it. Bull riding schools, which I never knew existed, and so I got to capture that. And the process of putting together a rodeo, I mean, they're 17-hour days just to make it happen. So it really gave me a different appreciation for it, and I tried to capture it as best I could. And you mentioned the festival part. I was going to self-release this film, and then someone who had seen the film said, "Why don't you try the festival route?" So I submitted to a number of them, and if I got one, I was going to be happy. And it just so happened to be the one that I got accepted to, which is the Wild Bunch Film Festival in Wilcox, Arizona, which coincides with the Rex Allen Rodeo Days. Uh, so that's kind of the long nutshell, why I decided to do that film.
Don Cardona is with us, media mogul. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. In a way, the sports media business is a rodeo, and we're all trying to ride that bull. So I can see a metaphorical significance to what you're talking about. There have been so many people, Don, in your life that have been so formative to you and how far you've made it. And I know that it would be almost impossible to name everybody, and we certainly don't want to leave anybody out. But if you could just take us to a moment or two where someone went above and beyond the call of duty to uplift you, to help you in a time of need, or to give you that boost and let you in on a potential opportunity that you will always be forever grateful for when it comes to that person.
Professionally, I'll give you that name in a second, but obviously my parents were obviously very big supporters. And then later my wife, when we got married, well, even when I was working. But professionally, I would say the first person that gave me my opportunity was a gentleman called Scott Hecht, and I know a lot of people in the industry know him. He and I met when I was an intern for the Phoenix Firebirds, AAA for the San Francisco Giants back in the day, and he was working for ESPN, which was a Cox production. And he came into the office and he was wearing ESPN shirts. So of course I was curious, what the heck is ESPN? And he told me that he was a producer. I was studying at Arizona State broadcasting, and so I didn't know everything about sports TV production. And I asked him what he did, and he said he was a producer. I had no idea. So I asked a little more and just told him I would love to come out and see what you do sometime. And he said, sure. And never thought it would happen. And he called me a couple days later and said, we added a game a couple days from now. You're more than welcome to come out. And I jumped on top of that. And I went and showed up early, and people were unloading the TV truck with the boxes and the cameras. And I just jumped in and started helping. That's just my nature. And helped them set up the cameras around the stadium, got to play around a little bit with the camera, and then I had to go do my day job. And then the game that night, I came down into the TV truck prior to the game starting and got to see a little bit about what was happening. And then I had to work the game. And my job there ended in the middle of the seventh inning. So then I went back into the truck again and I watched, and I just thought this would be so, like, this is so cool. I don't know anything about what's happening. It's all just gibberish and cameras moving and in the monitors and all kinds of commands. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but I want to do it. And at the end of that night, Scott was handing out invoices and to everyone on the crew, and he handed me one, and I thought this is a mistake, so I handed it back to him, and I said, I don't think this was meant for me. And he said, I haven't. He's like, and this is what I hope young people listening, really take to heart, because I wasn't expecting to get paid that night, but he saw my desire, I guess, and so he decided to pay me, and that shocked me. and the amount of pay that it was like three times what I was making as a waiter, waiting tables. And that really kind of turned the tables for me. So I would have to say Scott Hecht is one of them. And then another one at ESPN is a gentleman called Ed Sascalunas, and he was in the international department. And really, he just kind of helped tweak and make me better in a lot of different ways. We were doing a lot of stuff internationally and domestically. He would push me. He was one of those kinds that pushed me a little bit, but he also really gave me the confidence to do things on my own and help me to learn from my mistakes and kind of progress me along. But those are just the two of the many that I would say. My last boss was Dean Walker, senior vice president of production for Universal Sports Network and then NBC. Again, he trusted me with a lot of decision making to run the day to day for NBC Sports Group Denver when we were here before they closed everything up. And so, yeah, a combination of a lot of people, but those Scott Hecht really kind of catapulted that. And the interesting thing with us is we kind of followed each other throughout the career. He started me in Phoenix, and then we went to LA, and then he was lead director at TVG Network in LA, and then brought me on there when I moved to LA, and then I went to ESPN and helped him to connect with some of the people at ESPN, and then so it's been really interesting how this career has been, the trajectory for me has been.
I want to ask you about those early TVG days in just a moment. But one other person that I feel like has had an impact on you is Chris Farrow. And I'd love to hear the help that he has played in your career.
Chris was really interesting because again, I was in ESPN International, and I had been looking to do more domestic work, and I had the opportunity to somehow, and I don't know how this opportunity came, but I had the opportunity to produce college basketball. And because I was bilingual, there happened to be a basketball tournament in Cancun. And so I had got on the phone with Chris, and being in ESPN International, it's a different segment. So the skill sets don't necessarily match. And I remember being on the phone with him before, like the pre-production meetings, and he's going over and making sure, almost kind of like hand holding me through the process. And I think I said, "Well, do we need to use QKT for audio if audio fails, and how's that work?" And I think at that moment, at least my perception of it was, I think he really understood that I knew what I was talking about. And at that point, he kind of loosen the reins a little bit. And I think I went down there with Doug Gottlieb and
Oh, wow, Doug.
yeah,
Yes, of course.
he does, gosh, his name is escaping me right now. He does World Series for ESPN on radio, play
Oh,
by
Dan
play.
Schulman.
Not Dan Shulman. It'll come to me after
Sure.
we're done. But yeah, and then so we just kind of had a little relationship. He started getting me some more work, and then I left to go to NBC. And then many years later, I think I was done with NBC, and then I friended Chris on Facebook again, and we connected, and then he started bringing me on to some more productions when I think he was with Ross Mobile Productions at the time, which is now Ross Production Services. So, but
Late
he's
night.
been great. Like, he's been great. He and I I think we have a good relationship, and just a fun guy to be around. And he was one of my interviews on my Sports in the Making
Yes.
podcast as well. So
Yes,
yeah,
as
fun guy.
was Dean Walker. So I encourage everybody, you can go on Don's LinkedIn profile and you can see all the list of the interviews that you've had. And I want to ask you about late 90s TVG and how things have changed there. And I know you were only there for a couple of years, but what was it like at the beginning of that network's creation and where you were and the role you played and getting things on the air when this was such an up and coming venture?
So not if people don't know, TVG stands for Television Games Network, but it's the horse racing network. And I was brought on from Scott in the startup phase, and so there was 3 months or so, I think, just not doing nothing. And so there were a lot of times where I'm like, this is not. I don't want to just sit around. But it became we launched it. Chris Harrison, who was the host of The Bachelor, was part of that team. Todd Schrupp, a bunch of really good people. And Ray Bruni was the exec producer. Or I think he was the general manager or exec producer, something like that. Ray Bruni, he started KTLA 9 morning show, which made it become huge. And it was the philosophy was constantly battling. Do you go horse racing completely, or do you mix entertainment with it to get those people, get new audience? And so a lot of it was experimentation. And we were able to work on the signature shows at the time was the Works, and that was taking the thoroughbred workouts for some of the big events like the Kentucky Derby, the Belmont Stakes, um, and certain other events like that. So really what happened for me personally in that career was that was where I really learned how to refine my directing skills. But I also, when I went to we went to Kentucky, I had bought a laptop, and this is where I first learned how to edit on a nonlinear editor, Final Cut Pro. So I bought a laptop and I bought a little um, mini DV recorder, and one day I went to, I think it was Scott, and I said, "Can I take this out? I just want to see if I can build some teases or packages or whatever." And because at the time we were using uh, digibeta tapes, and they were bulky, and when we would do the workouts we had like 30 or 40 of them. So I was working tape producer, and we were in the back, and I had a stack of tapes this big that we would do for a half an hour show. You'd put them in and then just play a clip, and then it'd go to the next. And so I thought there's got to be a different way of maybe doing this if I can use that technology. And so I took it out there. I couldn't use it for what I had intended because it was too slow, the render times and things like that. But I decided to see if I can build some pre-show teases, to get into the show, or bumps and things of that nature. And we did, and it kind of worked out. So, um, but TVG is one of those networks that it was a true startup from scratch. Nobody had tried it before. Nobody knew what it was going to be. It started off as set top boxes. Of course, now everything's on your phone that with an app. But it surprises me to see when I watch occasionally, and just talking to some of the people there, that really hasn't changed a lot in terms of how it's done and what their mission is. They're incorporating more things in it. And last I'd heard, Kevin Grigsby is I think Kevin as well. Kevin runs the show there, and he's made some innovative changes that the public doesn't see. And talking to him in February when we first met, as a
Sure.
matter of fact, he gave me a lot of really interesting information on how that industry has transformed and how much money goes into that now. And so I think that's probably the biggest change, not necessarily from a production standpoint, although they have more money to spend when we did, but those are the interesting things I think with TVG from my perspective.
From that being a startup to you now starting up and doing your own thing. And I want to ask you about that. And Don Cardona is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. And certainly in wrapping up this conversation, I wanted to see if you could take us into how what you're doing on an individual level, where you're not having the uh, you're not being pulled, and you're able to showcase that creativity that you want because it's your product with Cardona Creative. What are you looking to accomplish with your own consulting, your own company in founding this? And how are you able to do things that you couldn't before because you're not tied down, I guess was what I meant to say, by guidelines or rules or restrictions from working with a certain network?
Well, there's still rules and guidelines because
Yes, of course.
my my company, really, I started the company as more of a survival thing. I'll be quite honest, because when NBC Sports Group Denver closed down here to move back to headquarters, really left me in a situation where I didn't know what I was going to do. And I could have tried to get another TV job elsewhere in the country, but Colorado's my home and I wanted to see what I could do here. So I launched that company. And really, it was more just about working with businesses for them to understand and utilize business video effectively. And that's the biggest challenge, I think. Well, the challenge for me right now is number one, I've never really had to sell anything, being in corporate TV. Number two, the philosophy is a little bit different because you're having to build something that's going to help that business. But really, it comes down to just storytelling, and I never realized how much storytelling I was doing in broadcast television as a producer until I started my business. Because if you think about it, as a producer, you're mapping out the show, you're trying to make it as entertaining as possible for the viewer, aside from the game, because the game kind of plays itself out. But building a 10-second tease is no different than doing a 3-minute package or even a 7-minute package, depending on the importance of the show. And building those kinds of things and weaving stories throughout a broadcast is really kind of the key of storytelling. You don't want people to change the channel, so you're constantly trying to keep them there. That time spent viewing that I'm sure everyone's heard of. Now that I'm working with clients, it's kind of a similar concept, but slightly different. So I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. But when it comes to the projects that I have, I am my own executive producer. I don't have to answer to anybody. I've self-financed a lot of the things that I've done. So there is no accountability in that respect, other than if I show it to people and they don't like it, that's my feedback. And we'll see once I release the film how well it does. Of course, any filmmaker is worried about that, right? Um, but really, it comes down to just trying to make something that's entertaining. I mean, sports is entertainment, movies are entertainment, TV shows are entertainment, and and everything's different. And so it's just trying to make something compelling that people learn something new. And when I was producing as well, I don't remember who told me this, a couple of people, but tell me something I don't know. And even in a simple baseball broadcast, just give me a piece of information as a viewer that I can take away saying I didn't know that. And a couple of people have told me that. So I think that's the focus. But when it comes down to my production company as well, I am also looking to somehow keep in the broadcast arena, whether it's sports or some other type of thing. I'm still looking at that, and I do have a couple ideas that I know I can't do myself, and that's where I need to branch out and again not make it just about what I'm doing, but incorporate other people. But that's the long-winded answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're multi-talented, multifaceted, and you're a guy, like you said earlier, you always have to be thinking of something. That's the way your brain operates. You're always
Yeah,
preoccupied. So it's one project and another. Maybe they're similar, maybe they're not, but what we can all see based upon the body of your work that you're capable of doing all of this. And
thank you.
we came across this interview, and like you just said, I hope that somebody got something out of this that they didn't know. And I'm sure that that was accomplished. And I also think that when it comes to storytelling, which is such an important part of the fabric of who you are, there was some great storytelling in this interview. And I don't know. I mean, Dom, maybe we might be making a movie of you one day.
I don't. I think that would be kind of boring, but I just want to thank you, for having me on. First of all, I was it was a complete shock that you would even consider me. But just going back to the way we were introduced, I think you reached out cold to me,
I did, yeah.
and that to me said a lot about you. And then when I finally made the trip out to LA, I had the chance to visit with you, and I just learned so much about what you're doing. And then to see you launch this podcast and all the stuff you're already doing with tennis and Fox Sports Radio, for as young as you are, I think people should really consider what you're doing as well, because a lot of young people these days don't have that initiative. So good on you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Don. And it's been a literal blood, sweat, and tears. And,
Yeah.
whenever somebody wants me on for a podcast, I'd be happy to talk about it. Everybody's got that story, but many moments of despair. But anytime that happened, Don, where I was at my lowest, I got an email, I got a call. Like there was something out there that said, don't give up yet. Don't give up yet. And so it's nice when life throws us those reminders. And maybe that means that we're in the right field. As hard as it is at times, enduring through it can lead to some really fun things, as you know.
Right. And I think you're doing it the right way, because some of the guests that you've had on, they're colleagues of mine too.
Sure.
And so when I saw some of them, I thought, wow, he's really making an impact, And one of those guys, if I can mention it,
Yeah.
Nick Davis.
Oh, yeah.
Nick was, when I was a cameraman, I think he was an AD for Channel 4 in San Diego with Scott Hecht, and they came out for spring training. I was one of the camera guys, and I think it was the spring training when Garth Brooks was trying to play
Oh,
baseball
my
again
gosh. I
for the
remember
San
watching
Diego
that.
Padres. Yeah,
Yes.
so there's an interesting little dynamic on the relationships that you make. And then when I was at ESPN, Nick came on as coordinating producer on the domestic side for baseball, and so we caught up, and there's so many great people in this industry, and I treat everyone like family, and it's just nice to know how it's all kind of unraveled for me and my experiences meeting people like him, and all the people before, and you, and I worked on a lacrosse for NBC Sports Peacock a couple weeks ago, and I was the AD, and that's okay, because there's younger people coming up in this, and they're very talented people. I mean, and they're doing multiple jobs now. Like when I was starting, it wasn't multiple jobs. It was, you had your assignment and that was it. And now you got guys TDing and directing, or producing and TDing, or I'm sorry, producing and ADing. It's, the industry's changing, and that's a good thing, and both kind of a challenging thing for some of us older dogs.
Well, you're not old. You certainly don't look it. And it might be daunting, but you're a good multitasker, as you've talked about in this interview. And I look forward to getting you out to the West Coast again at some point, and seeing you,
Absolutely.
and we'll make that happen. Don Cardona, what a pleasure. Everybody go check out his website, cardonacreative.com. I'm Bryan Fenley. Don, of course, with sports media in general. He is a pioneer, and I like to use that term because he is. And I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. Don, much appreciated. Very much enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Bryan. It's been a fun short time here.